Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Laura Rodriguez, who's the Vice President for Government Affairs at the Center for American Progress. Previously, she was the Chief of Staff for her hometown Florida Democratic Congressman, Representative Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, and also worked as a senior advisor for the U.S. Senator Bill Nelson of Florida and advised him on Latino policy, outreach, and media. She also spent a year as the Chief of Staff for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute and later spent 5 years at the United States Department of State's Legislative Affairs Bureau under the Obama administration, where she ended her tenure as Deputy Assistant Secretary for House Affairs. Welcome to Background Briefing, Laura Rodriguez.
Thank you so much, Ian. Great to be here.
Well, thanks for joining us. And the House, now dominated by a radical faction of Republicans, the Freedom Caucus, on Tuesday announced their picks for the powerful committee chairs in the Congress, and 11 out of the 17 of chairs of these new committees are election deniers who voted against the certification of President Biden's victory. And they include Representative Glenn Thompson for Agriculture Committee, Mike Rogers, Armed Services, Jody Arrington, Budget, Virginia Fox, Education and Workforce, Mark Green for Homeland Security, Jim Jordan for the Judiciary, Roger Williams for Small Business, Sam Graves for Transportation Infrastructure, Mike Bost for Veterans, Jason Smith for Ways and Means, and Frank Lucas for Science, Space and Technology. So those are all very powerful, influential chairs. So how do we deal with this? How do you deal with the fact that we have at least part of the legislative branch, or half of the legislative branch, meaning the Congress, in control largely of people who just simply don't deal with reality? I mean, it's that frightening.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And it is frightening. How you deal with this in the minority in the House is very much twofold. So your first order of business is going to be making sure that you are defending the rights of the constituencies, of all constituencies of the country, right? So making sure that what is being proposed, by whether they're election deniers or not, this party has clearly decided that they're going to go to the extremes, making sure that the policies that they're proposing don't go anywhere, and that they are proposing the alternative to make sure that the American people can really see the difference. What is the solution that Democrats are proposing, and juxtapose that with what's coming from the Republican side. The other piece of that, of course, is that we have Democrats in the majority on the Senate side that can helpfully be used to block any extreme legislation. And then finally, of course, we have President Biden in the White House that can veto anything that could possibly get through. So I think that the Senate is going to be a pretty effective backstop to most of the things coming out.
But it may be a backstop, but doesn't that imply gridlock?
It absolutely does. I think that we're going to see most folks up here in Washington, D.C. are very aware and realistic about the fact that there's going to be very little bipartisan legislation coming through in the next couple of years. Investigations, they'll happen. They'll mostly be a distraction. But as far as actual legislation goes, anything big, I think very much both in whether that's the private sector or in the party, the Democratic Party itself, we're very aware that there's just not going to be a lot of room for bipartisan work. That being said, there are certain pieces that a lot of Democrats are hopeful where they can work with Republicans because there's some common ground. Things like national defense. There's always a very powerful and robust farm bill that usually passes. The House has said that they want to do 12 appropriations bills. And while, of course, we are going to have some challenges with the budget resolution, whatever that might be when it comes, those are opportunities to also barter and negotiate things that might be wins for both sides.
Well, Jim Jordan, let's take the example of Jim Jordan, who's now the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and he's going to be holding all kinds of hearings and going after the Department of Justice. He finally, after being, harassed, if you will, by the press, or at least asked multiple times about his role in the insurrection and what happened on that particular day, we learned that he made multiple phone calls to Trump while the insurrectionists were rampaging through the Capitol. And he's obviously an ardent defender of Trump. And by any reasonable definition, he's an insurrectionist. I mean, if those people are not punished for the crime against American democracy that took place a little over 2 years ago, which was so outrageous, is that the problem? I mean, they're running loose without any sanctions. I mean, in any reasonable world, the people that supported the unsupportable and defended the indefensible should be put on trial, or at least have no credibility. That's what I find so troubling. When will we get some resolution there so that these people can be singled out as either criminals or aiding and abetting criminals?
Well, I think there's two things here. I think you're 100% correct. But one thing that we, fortunately we have a democracy, but, it has consequences when we elect certain people. And I think what we're going to see in the next couple of years is the Democrats and lots of other outside groups really highlighting exactly what you're talking about, which is this is what happens and this is what you get when you vote for the extreme. And it's going to be a matter of highlighting on a daily basis what it means to have insurrectionists in our Congress. It's incredibly dangerous. On the legal side, I'm not an expert. I'm not a lawyer, and I couldn't tell you exactly what the tools for the Department of Justice are against these folks. I think that those are still in the works. And unfortunately, our legal system does work very, very slowly. And so I'm not sure that they're out of the woods just yet. And so, I think we have to put that on the side. I do think that demonstrating to the American people the chaos that they bring with them and the absolute dysfunction and the extreme proposals that they're going to put forth is going to be the daily work of both the Democratic Party and outside organizations to ensure that the American people don't make the same mistake in 2024.
But these characters come from gerrymandered districts where they have safe seats. That's a part of the problem. And I'm just wondering whether there's any way to dislodge them or whether there's a better way to marginalize them as opposed to trying to vote them out if they're in incredibly safe districts, which is what they've done through gerrymandering. And that's why they're not accountable. It was John Boehner who described the predecessor to the Freedom Caucus, which was the Tea Party. He described them as legislative terrorists. Well, I think that's an apt description. So is there an alternative as opposed to trying to vote them out to at least marginalize them?
Yes, absolutely. I think that there are also a lot of organizations such as the ACLU and other organizations that are focused on the state level legal fights on gerrymandering. Those are still being played out in many of the states. I think that's one very large issue that needs to be worked out in the courts. The other piece of that, though, I would say I wouldn't rule out voting them out. Not every single one, of course, but what we saw in 2022 was actually quite a kind of miraculous. We saw people actually paying attention to the issues versus the party. We saw a lot of split ticket voting. People who are not necessarily, they're just not on board with the extremism anymore, really started to make those decisions. And folks are paying attention to politics in a way that they never have before. They've never really wanted to, but now they're being forced to. And that is partly due to the very disciplined messaging of the Democratic Party in the last 6 months, 9 months, letting people know these folks are going to take your personal rights away if you put them in charge. By all intents and purposes, they should have gotten a 20 to 30 to maybe even 40 seat majority in the House. They have a 5-seat majority. That is because of the work of Democrats and the candidates that were able to really show that difference. You're right, gerrymandering is absolutely a problem, and there are some folks that we might not be able to dislodge just with voting, but I think we can make a large dent in that effort.
So, Laura, what about the possibility of dealing with I don't know what the number is. I've heard something like there are 17 reasonable Republicans that sort of reflect your father's and grandfather's GOP, because there's no question that the GOP has become radicalized, and I think it was radical before Trump came along, but he's really metastasized it into Trump's own party, and now he's got all of his people in there. And even Kevin McCarthy, by the way, profusely and unctuously thanked Trump for helping him get the speakership. So there you have a clear leverage that Trump has, and you wonder how much the tail is wagging the dog there. But the fact is that there's still some Republican chairs that aren't Freedom Caucus and election deniers, and they are Kay Granger of Texas for appropriations, Kathy Morris Rogers for energy and commerce, Patrick McHenry for financial services, Michael McCall for foreign affairs, Bruce Westerman for natural resources, and James Comer for oversight and accountability. So they're not election deniers. Is there a possibility that the Democrats could work with the sensible Republicans and get something done? I mean, there was even talk about that during the agonizing 15 rounds of voting for McCarthy's speakership, that maybe they could put up an alternative speaker. So is that realistic?
I think it is. I think that you also heard the new Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries, talk about the fact that they are looking for partners to actually get work done. I do think that you're going to see a concerted effort by Democrats to reach across the aisle to these folks, these handful of folks that they can work with, and try to find solutions to some of these problems. The fact of the matter is, unfortunately, that they are a dying breed, but showing them, it's in the Democrats' interest to show them that they can get some wins by working with them and trying to kind of de-escalate issues so that everyone gets a win, but also we encourage Republicans on the moderate side, if we can call them that, or the non-election deniers, to hold their ground and stick around. Because most of the time, as you said, we've lost so many Republicans who just could not get on board with the Trump wing. And they've just, abandoned ship. They've left, and they're left very few Republicans to work with in the House. So I think the goal would be to try and keep as many around as possible.
Well, of course, the two prominent ones that were on the January 6th committee, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, have left the Congress, and hopefully that doesn't mean they've left politics, or at least lost their influence. But what's going to be done about this manifest fraud, this absolutely outrageous guy who got elected on the most unbelievable number of lies? It was just literally nothing about his past and his resume that was not a huge lie. And on top of that, he raised $700,000, and nobody knows where this money came from. And yet there, George Santos was there, sitting there, and apparently, according to some news reports, he gave a white power salute when he was sworn in. So I think that's an important priority, isn't it, to deal with George Santos?
Absolutely. Dan Goldman and Richie Torres just filed an official complaint with the Ethics Committee, exactly asking the question that you alluded to, which was, where did the money come from? Where did his money come from? He lent himself nearly $700,000 for his campaign, and no one can figure out how and where it came from. So that's a legal matter, and you break the law when you don't disclose your finances as a member of Congress truthfully. So, and as we've seen, Suffolk County DA is already looking into his finances as well out in New York. I think Mr. Santos is going to have a lot of legal issues. I'm not sure he makes it through this Congress.
So just in the last minute then, Laura Rodriguez, what should our listeners do in order to stay engaged and not just sort of look at this clown show and just give up on government, which of course is a part of the motive here? I mean, these characters on the Freedom Caucus, they're in effect in league with people like the Club for Growth. Mm-hmm. And after all, it was Grover Norquist, the head of the Club for Growth, that said his mission is to shrink government down to the point where you can drown it in a bathtub. Well, these guys in this House don't want government to work at all. And Grover Norquist, backed by the Koch brothers and other plutocrats, they want to shrink government and cut its ability. And the first priority that the Republicans had is to cut the IRS funding. So it's as clear as day what's going on here. What can our listeners do just to, lobby for sanity and for the functioning of a United States government?
Yeah, it's a tough ask, but I would say that they have to remain engaged in the sense of holding their members accountable, whether they have a Democratic representative or a Republican representative. They cannot disengage and cannot let them think that they are able to do anything under the cover of night, or that folks are not paying attention. No more backroom deals, no more things happening in the background. Hold your member accountable. Make sure that they're hearing from you. As a former staffer, I can tell you, every single call that you make into that office, every email that you send into that office is going to get logged. It's going to get read. It's going to be reported to that member. So you have to keep on them. It's a lot and it's exhausting, but it's what we need to do right now to save our democracy. It is where we are.
Well, Laura Rodriguez, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Ian. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
And again, I've been speaking with Laura Rodriguez, who's the Vice President for Government Affairs at the Center for American Progress. Previously, she was Chief of Staff for her hometown Florida Democratic Congressman, Representative Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, and also worked as a senior advisor for U.S. Senator Bill Nelson of Florida, advising him on Latino policy, outreach, and media. She's also spent a year as a chief of staff for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute and spent 5 years at the United States Department of State's Legislative Affairs Bureau under the Obama administration, where she ended her tenure as Deputy Assistant Secretary for House Affairs. This has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producer Graham Fitzgibbon. And to help us sustain this program into the future and assure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate or publictruthmedia.org, where you will find our nonprofit Public Truth Media Foundation, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And if you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we'll include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easy for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we also encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook at Ian Masters Media. And please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another background briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
The guy that lived next door in 305 took the kids to the park and disappeared.